all of you. Welcome to our this AI in Action seminar for this week. The title is Learning with Generative AI, Stories from the Classroom and Clinic by Dr. Troutman-Jordan. I'm very happy to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us today. Dr. Troutman-Jordan is an American Nurses Credentialing Center certified psychiatric mental health clinical nurse specialist. Her research aims to identify and develop effective and personalized self-management strategies tailored for persons living with dementia and their caregiver to age as successfully as able. Her research strives to develop evidence-based intervention to promote optimal function, meaning, and purpose for each individual in the caregiving diet. The desired outcome of her research are prevention or slowing of disease and aging-associated complication, improving quality of life, reduction of unnecessary healthcare utilization, avoidance of medication complication, injury, and abuse, neglect of person living with dementia. To this end, aligned with her research team, she has utilized AI as a tool for development and expansion of our caregiver education support resources. Thank you again, Dr. Troutman-Jordan. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share with a group of wonderful colleagues today about my experience. And as I was sharing just before the webinar began, part of what I'm going to share with you today was stimulated by opportunities I had through a couple summer institutes through the university to explore and enhance our understanding and our use of AI through teaching and research. And then the other part was really out of need and as well as curiosity through my own research. And I must pause here to say I'm thrilled to spot my dear friend / partner in crime / research partner, Dr. Boyd Davis, with us today. And she might even chime in to elaborate on how exciting our discovery of some of the things that I'm going to share with you that I've used in research has been. It really has made teaching and research tremendous fun. And I'll also remind people that I am more than happy to share anything. So if I have anything that is of use to others, I'll think I've got my contact information in here, and I'm always glad to share resources. So let me share my screen. All right, share. And I am not at my usual setup at home, but my colleagues who are hosting this webinar have agreed to notify me if someone has a question or a comment. I would encourage them to jump in. I'm happy to answer questions as they arise because I cannot see anybody's faces or any chat box as I'm getting ready to share. I only have my one screen. Want to make sure, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as you can see, the title of my presentation is Learning with Generative AI, Stories from Classroom and Clinic, and I'm hoping to share with you things that I've discovered and that we're currently using as strategies for teaching as well as research. And clinic is listed here because most of the strategies and things that we've done that I'll share with you have been applied in the clinical setting to my undergraduate psychiatric nursing students and their clinical experiences. So just some objectives. Contact information. I'm pretty quick to respond, so please give me a call and or feel welcome to email if I can help anybody. I'm always willing to try. And again, glad to share any resources that I might have that could be of use to others. So our objectives, I'm hoping that you can describe one application of AI in the classroom and or clinical setting. Compare and contrast the use of ChatGPT for creation of case studies, critical thinking questions, and debate activities, and explain some uses of AI in research. So these are just the points I hope to cover today during our time together, looking at what generative AI is, again, strategies for teaching, some things that we've done to use AI in research, limitations as those are always exist, and concerns. And then, of course, I would invite questions and ideas. Always a good idea to jot down those ideas when we get those. So, generative AI, just to distinguish and differentiate and clarify for generative AI versus AI. When we talk about generative AI, this is referring to the use of artificial intelligence techniques involved in generation of new data or content. It is similar to data or content that it has been trained on. So we're creating new things. And there's where some of the questions start to emerge, I think, is it who gets credited with this if it's something's generative, it's something that's new, that's been created, because while it's new, it's been created or trained on things that already existed. And I think we're still striving to answer that question. It's probably going to evolve just like the use of GAI. So first, teaching with AI. When I learned first about this idea of AI, I thought, oh, this chat GPT thing is pretty exciting, a lot of promise. Um, for those who are here with us who perhaps teach, you might use case studies to teach. Um, Case studies are great, but they take considerable time and mental energy to construct or to locate. And if you locate one in the literature, it might always not always match what it is that you need or what it is that you want to be encompassed in a case study, which might take you back to modifying or creating that case study. So I thought, after I learned the basics of ChatGPT, I thought this would be interesting. So here's my prompt. I can't get the link to work. I'd hope to be able to show you, but by entering just this was the only phrase I entered. That's my quote: "Create a schizophrenia case study." It generated, as you may know, within seconds, a lovely 3 or 4 paragraphs. His name was John. I think he was 37 years old. He was an African American male. So it gave me a brief history of the present illness. And then it gave me some presenting symptoms and a little bit of background that led John to the current hospitalization that he was in. So I thought, oh, this is wonderful. Fits excellently, which is what my hope was, for an alternative case study for my students. So what sometimes is necessary, if we have inclement weather, if a student is ill and can't make it to clinical, they must fulfill those clinical hours. So what do? Well, typically I have, and many of my colleagues will create some other kind of alternative activity for that student. I teach the psychiatric mental health nursing clinical, so I historically have found or constructed case studies and had the student develop a care plan of nursing problems and nursing interventions that they will carry out for that patient, and then perhaps identify community resources that can be used to help that patient, medications that they would anticipate needing to teach that patient about. But now I had this case study in a matter of seconds. So I could then apply the questions and the standard things I typically do. I also, as I further explored ChatGPT, it helped me then in generating some prompts to guide that student's alternative activity surrounding that case study. We try to tell our students, and we of course should be mindful, ChatGPT is not a panacea. We still have it's pretty reliable, at least incredible in my experience and from what I've read in the literature, but we still have to know that content to know, is this accurate, what it's telling me. In at least in my experience and from what I've read, in most instances it is, but it's important nonetheless. I bet some of you have encountered situations where students have clearly generated something from ChatGPT, maybe not even read it, and submitted it, and this is not accurate. This is an incorrect statement or an incorrect dosage. So you still have to know your content. But I was pleased with the case study that it gave me for John. Well, then I became curious within the following months. I wanted to make this even more interactive. So at this point, we were able to create, Photor, and that's the program that we've used. We were able to start creating images. This gentleman was created through, I think Photor is what I used to create him, but I just gave the description guided by my case study that ChatGPT generated for me. I think I told it to create a young African American male who looked concerned or paranoid or very serious. So this is the image it gave me. So now I have John, his case study scenario. I have an image for him. Then I thought I'd like to give John a voice. So, and I apologize that my link is not working here, but this should lead you to a brief statement. John says, "Leave me alone, go away, I'm not talking to you." I just did the free version, but it is capable. It is possible. We do have the capability now to create an accent. I could have given John an accent. I made John's speech to sound pressured, to sound serious. So now I have my case study, I have my image of John, and I have John telling me to leave him alone. He doesn't want to be bothered, which we very much might encounter with a person who has schizophrenia and probably is paranoid. Some other things that I've done, and this was through the support of our Center for Teaching and Learning when I did an AI fellowship a couple years ago. I spent a year working on a project, some of which is represented in this webinar, the slides, was they said, well, did you think about other things that you could do besides that case study? How about critical thinking questions? So I told ChatGPT, generate some critical thinking questions surrounding this case study. And it did. So I could have the students respond to the critical thinking questions in a post-conference, perhaps. I could do that. And I've used it in post-conference, and I've also used it through a discussion forum via Canvas, our learning management system. So that was just another way to get at this content that was represented by the case study of John, who's a young male with initial diagnosis of schizophrenia. And then the partner I was working with at the Center for Teaching and Learning said, well, you could always try debate. So I told ChatGPT to reframe the critical thinking questions and the main points of the case study to a debate format, which I have not, in this particular class, have not assigned to students, but it generated an assignment where I could have had them argue both cases about some aspect of the case of John. So here in, I would estimate less than an hour total, I was able to create this case study, which can be used as a standard case study where they have some activities, a set of critical thinking questions for in-person discussion or asynchronous discussion, as well as a debate. So, and the other thing that's a beauty, I think, about this is, students talk and people might get tired of the same assignment. They hear what happened the previous semester, etc. But now I could change it up. So perhaps if I had one group that was a more quiet group that did not converse as much, and I wasn't going to try to get them to converse, which I generally would try to do that, but I could modify how students achieve these same goals, learning goals, with this same case study, depending on the format. So this is just another example of a case study. This is a different, this was not Photor. I forget where I got this guy, but I wanted to create, and there are a host of programs that we can access to generate just images. So this was one that I was exploring with, and I wanted to create a grumpy looking older man. I was going to use this, and I actually did use this in an aging course that I teach. So I also told ChatGPT, and this was very specific. Here's the ChatGPT prompt: a narrative introduction coming from a grumpy baby boomer male. The students were talking about or learning about the baby boomer generation during that particular week. So I had given it very specific prompts, which a person may or may not actually speak of this nature, but I gave them this prompt, and then I gave them some discussion questions that they had to answer about what they thought was going on with this man or some other elements. So that was just another example of how I've used, and this was a more brief case study. This was not for nursing students. This was for a class that was interdisciplinary, so less focused on medications, medical aspects, because many of my students were gerontology and other disciplines. So just another use of ChatGPT as well as my graphic generator for other case studies. A third example, and this was, I would say this is the most interactive that I've done. For this one, I wanted, well, and this was all prompted by a great question that a student asked me in clinical one day. The student said, well, do we ever see kids with bipolar disorder? The particular agency we were at did not have children or adolescent treatment. So the students were not going to get a chance to work with a child or adolescent, much less see one with bipolar disorder. So I answered the student's question, and then I went home and thought, how can I create a case study experience for the students to expose them to a child dealing with bipolar disorder? So the first thing I did was I started out with YouTube. Let me see if I can find a video that demonstrates that. And that's what I did here. I just typed create a video of a child with bipolar disorder. let's see. So here's my child. Hopefully you can hear this. I'll just show a brief one. Okay, so there's our Rebecca, the manic child. That was easy. It took seconds to find that. So then I went back to my friend, my dear colleague, and I call ChatGPT our friend. I went back to my friend ChatGPT, and here in quotes, you can see the prompt that I gave it. Speak as Rebecca, a 10-year-old manic child. I thought this was, and I did not edit this either. I thought this was interesting how it came up. It gave me a quote from Rebecca. So, that's pretty cool. So then I went back to my image generator because images are always helpful. She's a little bit older than our Rebecca in the video, but this was what ChatGPT gave me when I asked it to create an image of Rebecca, the little girl from the video. So now I had at least a graphic. I had my video. And then what I did is I posted this. Students had the scenario of Rebecca, and then they needed to document their assessment findings based on their observations. I tried to simulate an electronic health record by creating a Google Doc. So then the students go in into the Google Doc, and just like we would see an electronic health record, they can see the records that the other students have documented, or the other progress notes that other students have documented about Rebecca, our manic child. Then, to be again interactive, I had them submit, they could do audio or video recording of a report, like they were calling the MD or the provider with their assessment data. So they submitted a brief recording, an MP4 recording of reporting off their assessment findings, and then they upload that file to Canvas. So this one was fun to create, and I got the students involved. They saw the video, they responded to the prompt. They also had a discussion forum response about this experience. They documented, they did their charting through their Google Doc, and then they had to call the provider. So they were doing some auditory, some kinetic, as well as some reading for that learning experience. And the other part of this, not that we don't want to or shouldn't be doing work, but it's very different as an educator and more enjoyable. You can assess different points of the student that you wouldn't be able to capture if I had just had them write a paper. I can hear them, I can see them, I can learn. So I'm more holistically able to assess that student's knowledge acquisition through use of these kinds of activities. So then the next question is evaluating these case studies. And I started to mention this a bit previously, but I can read their narrative notes. I can give them written feedback on that Google document. The other thing that's nice about that is they can see other nurses, just like we would in the hospital. You're going to get to see other caregivers, other staff nurses documentation, what they maybe noted about that patient or didn't note about that patient. Then again, they're also gaining technical skills as they're utilizing these different technologies, having to create videos or audio tapes and upload those. And the other thing that was really interesting about the video responses, not on this assignment, but I did a different assignment where I created a medication error, but the students were not told that it was a medication error. And as a result of the medication error, the patient had a neurological response. It was an antipsychotic that was inadvertently given to the wrong patient. And what was interesting through the documentation, as well as their calling the provider to give a report of what happened, all but two of them reported the medication error, but they did not detect that the patient was having adverse side effects, extrapyramidal symptoms. So I'm not sure that they would have gotten that, or they would have, or that I would have been able to know that they missed that piece had they just written out the response. So that was interesting. And also how they informed the provider that an error occurred, how they framed that when they, and I also had them call and report what happened to the patient's family member. So they had to give this information, but to two different recipients, and how we would communicate with the provider would obviously be different than a family member. So that gave me some insight into the students' understanding and their application. that I couldn't have gotten if they'd just done a written assignment. Other things that I've done is, of course, engage the students in person as well as asynchronous discussion forum, exchange of information and discussion, as well as giving feedback on each other's responses. Um, Another benefit that is afforded is there can be a more formal type of peer review. I can assign peer reviews through our learning management system. And so that gives them experience giving, when I have peer reviews, they're required to give a strength and something that can be improved on. So people have to identify those points and also be able to communicate. Well, this wasn't really clear to me, or I think you could make this stronger. And that's not always easy for students to be able to do. So AI in teaching was a lot of fun. And as I started to gain more skills and have more creative activities stimulated, I thought this would be very interesting and I can see some applications to research. And I'll tell you some background story here. Starts right here. So my research with my beloved research partner and partner in crime, as we like to call ourselves, involves looking at psychoeducational, I would say psychoeducational, more specific to management and support and care. So that would be the psycho and educational part. So teaching them, helping them better understand the disease process. That's the psycho and the educational piece. Not just understanding the disease process, but understanding strategies to ameliorate the symptoms that a person living with dementia often experiences. So we have a set, and she had begun this work some years ago, a set of 20 brief 1 to 2 page graphic medicine guides. So you see a brief conversation between two individuals, and there's narration, again, brief narration, because people who are caregivers don't have time or sometimes the skill set to read lengthy, very verbose explanations and sets of instructions. So they're graphic caregiver guides, and they depict common situations that occur when a person has dementia, such as agitation, dealing with helping that person communicate and express their needs. As you can see for the example here, this would go with the strategy for dealing with the person with the dementia who's resistant to hygiene care. So because they're graphic guides, we need images. So it was going to be cost and time prohibitive to hire people to create the graphics, and we needed very specific graphics. Like I said here, because the caregiver guides exist now in 9 different languages, we're talking about translating, which we've used to help support our translation. We've used online translation services that we had back translated and used real people, but that is AI did support us to some extent in that. And also we needed to create images. So we said, if we are having difficulty finding stock images, so even when we were going to pay, it was hard to get the images that were as specific as we needed, such as an older adult Asian male in a bathtub. It was going to be, again, time and cost prohibitive to hire somebody to generate these images, so we decided to create our own images. So we really began to have lots of fun, and again, it generated ideas for future use as we started to generate our own images. And so we created images for all of our caregiver guides, all 20 of those. The beauty of this also was, like I said, the caregiver guides exist in 8 or 9 languages now. So each language version also has a tailored set of images that look like the people who are going to be using those guides. So the complexion, the gender of those people all looks different depending upon the language group that's being targeted. So we've had tremendous fun and learned a lot as we've worked on these caregiver guides. Again, we've saved tremendous time because and part of our challenge initially was that we could not find people to hire to generate our graph, to create our artistic depictions. We also have saved funds. Research money, I don't need to tell anybody, is tight these days and getting tighter. So we were able to save time as well as money when we generated our own images. and we learned new skills, and we really have had a lot of fun doing this work. This is a depiction of an example of one of our caregiver guides. So as you can see here, and this is the version, this is actually, this one goes with, you can see here on the right side of the image, our gentleman in the bathtub. This is our older adult Asian male who has been in the, was resistant to hygiene care and getting in a tub. So this is the current the current status of our caregiver guides. This is the culmination of a couple of small grant projects. So the graphic guide started out in English. This is what's represented on the left side of the screen. And then it's been translated. So we hired a translator a couple summers ago to translate this guide into Mandarin. We also hired someone to do one into Spanish. We hired Haitian Creole as well. So those are the three languages we worked on that summer. But we have our graphic guide. So this is the content on the left side. On the right side is the, we got English on both sides. The Mandarin, if anybody happens to speak Mandarin, you'll see this content that we've got on either side is what's represented on the guide. And then we've got our images representing people who look like the people who are going to be providing the care, that is Asian individuals. So that's great. And that was an effort to best meet the needs based on best practice recommendations. So I will say this also, our caregiver guides are based on evidence-based recommendations for each of those scenarios. So we also did an extensive literature review to make sure that the things we were recommending and depicting in the caregiver guides were what is recommended based on best evidence. And in a brief format, because people may not have the reading ability and certainly not the time when they're in the midst of dealing with caregiving to stop and read a brochure or a booklet, which is great. But now we're on to the next step, which is digitization of the caregiver guides to include animation and narration. And this was a project that began summer before last, where we started building and adding onto our research team. And so we have partnered with at least 9 other individuals throughout different colleges and departments across our university, including Center for Teaching and Learning, information, computer science, education, gerontology. I think we've got someone from psychology as well, but a host of different disciplines represented on this team. And we began meeting after that summer institute every 2 or 3 weeks. We would meet on Fridays to work on digitization of these caregiver guides. So what we hope to do is add animation, and we're going to use Vyond to create animation and also voiceover. So for the caregiver who perhaps can't read, perhaps has visual impairment and need, or for the auditory learner, so that they can access these caregiver guides in a digital format. Like I said, now we have the caregiver guides in 9 languages, but at the time that I created this slide, we had it in 8 languages. We did use AI to support some translations. And again, we did not, nor do we recommend relying solely on AI for translation purposes, but we did use it to get us started. And then we cross-checked against or with people who spoke that language in their native tongue. So at this point, we have it in 9 languages, but our research team met every 2 or 3 weeks as we worked on our proposals. And what we are proposing to do now, we have one under review at AHRQ and one under review at the National Institute on Aging. So they're similar, related projects, but with different foci. But what they share in common is they involve the digitization of these caregiver guides and the testing of these caregiver guides after they're digitized and have narration added. So there's the creation of that process, and then looking at outcomes. We know that the caregiver guides have promising outcomes in their hard copy form. And so now we need to see about the effectiveness of the caregiver guides and the effectiveness of the new form, which will have animation and narration if we can get this funding. That remains to be seen. But we're hopeful. And then the other thing, of course, like I said, for example, there's accuracy and credibility of our content, whether we're using that for teaching or using that for research purposes. We have to be concerned about that. Um, on the part of our students, of course, one of the things that we probably all have heard about and are concerned about is this idea of plagiarism, concerns about cheating, and students just not learning the content. And particularly for those of us in healthcare specialties, that's a concern because if a student doesn't learn lab values, medication dosages, you could harm a patient. And one of my own concerns, and I'm hoping others might have some suggestions here, is this idea that, well, I don't need to learn that. I can go look it up. I'll have my phone, which could be true, but you're going to have to know to look that up because something doesn't seem right. And secondly, if you have a patient in an emergent situation, there may not be that 2 or 3 minutes to look on your phone. So it's still important to know that content. Then, of course, our legal concerns. Who does this information belong to? If you do something with information or you utilize something, come on in. Okay, I'll come in. No, come on in, please. I've hijacked the break room. But there's legal concerns because if a person is using information that they needs to be credited or cited to the source. How do you cite AI? I imagine some of you have had the same experience I've had, which is now as we start to submit papers for consideration to journals, we're having to issue statements verifying that AI was not used, or if it was used, in what capacity. That again, too, seems like a moving target as we're still sorting out this legal aspect. And then again, of course, is the safety, and this goes on with the not learning piece. If someone does not know, or if you do look something up, you need to know if it's correct or not. You need to be able to validate that. So, and one of these chief things we think about is medications. Going back to that example I gave with the case scenario, the patient had been given an inappropriate dose of Haldol and they began to have extrapyramidal symptoms, which for anybody who's not psychiatric, that's a concern because you have some neurological symptoms that can progress and they could end up with irreversible neurological symptoms. A grave concern that I had, and again, I wouldn't have got this if I hadn't given the students the scenario in the way that I did. I'm not sure that they would have known that the patient doesn't just have some complaining of some throat symptoms. It was a symptom of EPS. So, even with the resources, that wasn't detected by 7 or 8 students in my group of 9. So that's a concern. And then also, this is constantly evolving and changing. So what we're doing today may or may not be all that we can do and all we know to do in a week, in a month. Every time I go back in to create something, an assignment, or to do something related to research, I find some new capabilities. So we constantly have to stay on top of this. Of course, I probably don't need to tell people that. One of the other things that we did as part of the project or not project, but as part participation in the Summer Institute that I mentioned, a group of us in the College of Health and Human Services who were particularly interested had an opportunity, and we served on a task force to look at what we know and how is AI being used within our college. So we did some work on that, and that was a couple summers ago as well. And a spinoff of that, a group of us within the College of Health and Human Services, there's 5 or 6 of us, were particularly interested and had continued this work. We have a paper that did get accepted for publication. And one of the things that we looked at and did was we surveyed, as well as got some open-ended qualitative responses from various faculty members on how were they using AI. So these are some of the responses that faculty used when we started out, because we developed the questions that we were going to ask. When we developed the questions, we needed to know what questions to ask. So we started with an informal, just asking at several regular faculty meetings, who was using AI? Were people using AI? And a small number, I would say, I can speak to within the School of Nursing, perhaps maybe less than a quarter people said that they were using it. rough estimate there. These are some of the things that people within the school nursing told us how they were using AI. Generally positive from the people who were using it. And there were some responses that indicated that a willingness or an interest. It would be interesting to go back and ask these same questions again, because like I said, these questions were asked a year or so ago. So I would hope that we've got more faculty who are on board, because clearly it's continually evolving and new questions and challenges as well as opportunities will arise. But these are just some of the feedback that we got from our faculty within the School of Nursing. I think, yes, okay, here's my sources. And I think that takes care of that. I thank you. And let's see, end show. All right. Whoops. Can I answer any questions?
Looks like we may have had one question from Jeff. Do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Oh, not at all. Through your whole presentation, Dr. Meredith, I heard about the use of Chat GPT, but I just saw with one of our notices coming through our email, at least in Atrium Health, Advocate Health, that we're going to be limited to just Microsoft Copilot. Everything else is going to be shut down here on campus and at the hospital. So I didn't know if you knew if your experience has been at all with Copilot, using Copilot, and has it been as effective as ChatGPT?
I've used it very limitedly, primarily because I've been able to use ChatGPT and just have gravitated toward that. Although I have used, yeah, I've used Copilot only for purposes of, isn't that the technology that we use when we're on Zoom to create the transcripts?
Yeah, we use it for, it's used a lot in the Microsoft suite since it's a
Mhm.
Microsoft-based AI. So it's used within Teams, it's used within PowerPoint, Word, Excel, you name it, you can use it there.
Well, and you actually did answer my question and help me clarify, because that's where I've used Microsoft Copilot through Zoom meetings, because through our university we have utilized Zoom, and so our university switched to Microsoft Copilot, so that provides our narrative, our captioning. And yes, I have used that. So with our research, when we've done a number of focus groups related to our caregiving research. Is also, we've got some research involving corrections nurses and corrections officers, and their awareness of and how they respond to individuals who are incarcerated who appear to have or do know, we know, have traumatic brain injury or dementia. And so for all of those focus groups, we've used Copilot to generate our transcripts, which again, glad you brought that up. Forgot to put that in my slides, but that again has saved time and money to get our verbatim text. And what we do after that is then we, of course, go back and cross check it. Excuse me. So yes, we found it's fairly, I mean, just like anything, you have to go back and check it, because much of our work has been done with people who are English as a second language. So we've noticed with accents that words will be picked up differently. In 9 out of 10 times, you can figure out what the person was saying. There's been a couple times we've had to go back and cross check against the video to make sure we correctly interpreted what Copilot wrote down that wasn't a real word, because it just based on the sound of it. But I would say for the most part, it's been reliable. It's worked. We haven't had any kind of problem with it, and it's worked as well as the uses that we've had Chat GPT for, as far as having to go back and make corrections or edits or think what was this supposed to communicate, because it's not clear based on our transcript. Does that help?
It does.
I thought of another thing I want to add. Some of these things, like I said, things evolve so quickly. But another resource that I've used in teaching, has anybody used Google Notebook? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, I gotta send y'all this. I'll email it to Latrice. This is incredible. So, and it's free. So Google Notebook is the coolest thing, y'all. So for Google Notebook, you can get, again, you can get a free account, and then it creates an AI generated podcast. One of my colleagues told me about this back in January. So it creates an AI podcast. You get your free account from Google Notebook, and I'll also send Latrice a podcast that I created. So if anybody wants to hear it, you create your Google Notebook account, then you upload. It has to be a PDF document. I think there might be a couple of other formats, but you upload your document. And then, so let's say I wanted a summary of an article, or I wanted a discussion of an article. I upload that article in the PDF. Depending upon the length of the document, it'll take, little more or less time to generate your podcast. But then you have a lovely podcast that discusses the content of that article in, again, depending upon the length of the article, it might be an 8 minute up to like a 15 minutes. The longest I've got. It creates a conversation between two AI generated voices. And I joke because it sounds like they're on public radio. They start out to say, let's take a deep dive into therapeutic communication. And then they discuss all the points of your slides that you uploaded. So one thing that I've done is I've used my slides for my students. I'll upload those, and then I give them the AI generated podcast, is what they call it, of the discussion of those lessons. So it can be used to reinforce the written content. If you've got students that are more auditory learners, they've got that option, and it's the same thing that are in the slides. So I'd like to think that it's being used to reinforce the slides, or the slides are reinforcing that content for my visual and auditory learners. But that's just another way to get that content to them. And really incredible to see. And it sounds very nice as they've done that. So I've done that as well with some of my students. I have not used that in research yet, but I'm sure that there's no reason that we couldn't do this with our caregiver guides. And that could be our auditory we need to write that on our to-do list. We need to experiment with that. I've not uploaded the guides, but I think it would be interesting to see what would happen if we uploaded the guides that I shared with you to Google Notebook. So that's just another possibility for use of AI for teaching or research. For those who might have joined later or not heard this, there's a link in the chat box that I finally figured out how to do. It says illicit.com. That's something I was telling people earlier on that I learned about from one of our physicians. And this was, you can get various kinds of accounts. I just did the free account, which appeared more than adequate for me. But you can do a very quick search. It took maybe 10 minutes to be able to do this, but I created a prompt. I wanted something about families and trauma, and it searched the literature and presented me with a summary of 50 articles on research and best recommendations for helping families with trauma. So a very helpful resource. Illicit is what that one is called. A very helpful resource for advancing your research, or if you needed to prepare talking points for a student lesson, something of that nature. That's another really cool one that I just discovered within the past couple months. I was looking, it looks like someone else has experienced Google Notebook as well. I see the question about Microsoft Analyst, and I've not used that one. Has anyone? Microsoft Analyst? That's an interesting comment that someone shares about the literature on rates of omissions with Microsoft Copilot. I'm less familiar with that than I am ChatGPT, so I haven't seen anything on the literature related to Microsoft Copilot either, unfortunately. I'm going to, I think, place my email again in this chat box if I can figure out how to do that, just in case anyone didn't get it off the slides, because like I said, I would be happy to answer any questions that I could.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was amazing presentation.
Let's see. I'm trying to post if I can't get my email to go in there because I don't, like I said, I don't have my regular setup. I'm sure that Ms. Harris could get it out to others.
Of course. Thank you so much for your
Yeah.
presentation.
Gladly. And if anybody is interested in collaborating, or like I said, if I can provide anything that can help anybody, I'm more than happy to. We love to partner with others.
Very wonderful. If there are no other questions, we will allow everyone to enjoy their time back. Any other questions? Okay, we'll let Dr. Mogini close us out.
All right. Thank you very much, all. Thank you, Dr. Troutman-Jordan, and thank you all for joining us today.